everybody for attending this webinar. It seems like every time we have one of these, it's more important even than the last one. But we've got so many things that are happening right now. But I did want to start off with something I'd really rather not start off with. In fact, it's very, very counterproductive. But for those of you that have been following or maybe haven't gotten a chance to follow, there's been a little bit of a tussle going on with a gentleman named J.W. Ross, who is the founder of the Global Kratom Coalition, and he's the CEO of Botanic Tonics. The reason I bring that up is because they've been pushing a bill in California on Kratom, which basically would protect their product and exclude every other product. Because, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're trying to very seriously limit the quantity of I forget the name of the drug.
Mitragynine. So
yeah, Mitragynine. I don't know why. Yeah, Mitragynine. They're trying to very much limit that to only basically qualify their product, which is very disturbing at the very, very least. We all got to be in this fight together. You know, we've had the FDA for going on a decade and a half, basically lying about what Kratom does and doesn't do. And then when we push them and put them on record, they basically back off and say, well, no, we have never said that Kratom is dangerous. And it's been incredibly frustrating. But the reason I point that out is because this is a time that we've got to be incredibly unified. It's like playing whack-a-mole. I think that's what Mac has said before. It seems to pop up in one jurisdiction after another that they're operating on bad information, mostly from the FDA, and trying to either ban Kratom or take some other adverse regulatory policy that would severely hinder what we're doing or put us out of business. And most recently, this tussle with J.W. Ross has become incredibly problematic because one of the things that I learned very quickly in Congress, also as I served in the state legislature, is when different actors come in representing the same product or the same issue, and they have just 180-degree different viewpoints, what happens is it basically sabotages the whole thing. And the policymakers believe there's no credibility because the organization can't get its act together. And that's essentially what's been happening in California as this organization, the Global Kratom Coalition, is pushing this legislation. And then simultaneously in Florida, they agreed to work in good faith with the AKA to put together a KCPA bill there that we can all live with, and working with the Department of Agriculture. And then unbeknownst to us, they were conducting secret meetings by themselves with the Department of Agriculture, again, trying to do the same thing they're doing in California. Their legislation would exclusively protect their product while excluding all other products. And it's not scientifically based. It seems to be just out of pure greed. Then most recently, just within the last few days, there was an expose that was done on the CEO of Botanic Tonics and the founder of the Kratom Coalition. And it's almost like a TV movie of the week. In fact, it's very surreal. In this expose, the reporter, who's done quite a bit of extensive research on this individual, found out that is not his real name. His real name is it Jerry Cash? Is that correct, Mac? And he was involved in another project many years ago, and he misappropriated about $10 million from this public energy company. And he was sentenced to 9 years in prison and got an early release after 3 years, serving 3 years, and has made claims to a reporter that he was part of a witness protection program because he was cellmates with some Nazi, some guy from a Nazi organization, and turned state's evidence on them, according to him, and that he was in a witness protection program. And if the reporter went on with this expose, putting out his name and all that information about him, that he'd go to jail himself. And anyway, the reporter, any of you that are interested, I'm sure that Ryan can get you a copy of the video. And you should be interested because it impacts our industry, I think, very, very much. It ebbs away at that credibility that we've been trying so hard to build in the last 10 years. And anyway, the story goes on. He then tries to retaliate against Mac for some odd reason. Mac would not concede with him on the California legislation that it was a good idea, and worked to the passage of that crazy proposal he put together. And so he's decided that Mac is public enemy number one to him, and came out with some information, which, by the way, I've known Mac for going on 25, 30 years. And I've known this information about Mac since day one. He's never done anything to hide it. But, Mac was this chief of staff to the secretary at Labor HHS during the Reagan administration. And Mac could probably explain the details of everything better than I can. But Mac ended up doing is the term plea agreement, Mac, when they came to you, and there was a document that Mac had been searching for, which basically would have totally exonerated him, and he couldn't find it, so he signs this plea agreement, and then after he signs the plea agreement, lo and behold, they find the document but the federal government really did a fast one on him, and basically said, well, it's too late in the process, and you can't submit that evidence now. And so Mac ended up doing a plea agreement. I think had to be behind bars for what, about 6 months, or was it 8 months, Mac?
4.
4. Okay, I couldn't remember I knew it was a chunk of months, but the fact is, Mac has been very, very open and transparent about all of this. I know that on the lobbying reports, he has to provide that information with virtually every client he's ever represented. He has provided that information. He's never shied away from it. The interesting thing about this Jerry Cash guy is that he changed his name and he said he did so because he was in this witness protection program. But when the guy from the expose checked with the U.S. Marshals, they basically said that his story was not accurate. And so anyway, to make a long story short, now he's trying to drag Mac through the mud, and nothing could be further from the truth. Mac has been an exemplary citizen and has done wonderful things for a lot of organizations. But I'll tell you right now, in my belief, and I was the congressman that led that letter back in 2016, and Mac is the guy that put that together. Mac is the guy that came to me and asked me to lead that. He basically did all of the legwork to put the coalition together. And I know I'm going to be embarrassing Mac because he's a humble guy, but the fact is, we wouldn't be in the place we are today if it wasn't for Mac Haddo. I can guarantee you that. Because of all the work that he's done. I mean, I can't believe every time I talk to him, he's in another part of the country defending Kratom. And I've got to tell you, I've learned so much from this guy. And we are so blessed and so lucky to have him working for the AKA. And Mac, I hope I haven't embarrassed you, but I hope I've been complete in the story. But Mac, I'm going to hand it over to you. But the gist I wanted to pass on to all of you is that this is a very, very turbulent time, and it is one of those self-inflicted wounds. When I say self-inflicted, it's a member, of the Kratom industry. Now his product is actually half Kratom and half what's the other one? Kava.
Kava.
Yeah, and they don't know. I mean, there hasn't been enough scientific study done on this product to know exactly what the ramifications are. But the reporter in this expose claims that with that combination, there have been some who have theorized that combination is what makes it incredibly addictive in a very different situation from Kratom. But a lot of folks out there and policymakers are not going to differentiate, between Kratom and Kratom with Kava. And this is not a good thing for us. And I believe that we have to stand strong. For one thing, we need to stand strong with Mac because I'll tell you, we need him more now than we've ever needed him. But the second thing is we need to stand up against this kind of garbage and be very, very vocal about actors that are out there distorting the truth and doing what they do for personal gain at the expense of everybody else. And with that, I'll shut up and hand it over to you, Mac.
Well, Matt, thank you. And I certainly, it is embarrassing that we even need to have these kinds of discussions. But I've been honored to work with the American Kratom Association from the day that I was first called to solicit my help. And as you have mentioned, I've always disclosed in advance with any client, and I'm required by federal law to list the conviction that I experienced back in 1987. We're talking 37 years ago. And I can tell you that Washington, D.C. is a fishbowl. And when I went through that very embarrassing episode, despite the fact that Jack Anderson, then a nationally syndicated columnist, wrote several articles about my case, saying how I'd been politically railroaded, and there were reasons and circumstances around the document. It was a non-intent statute that I pled guilty to. I didn't have the document. That was the only way to avoid prosecution. And then after I pled, and you have to stand before a federal judge and honestly say you violated the law, and I wasn't willing to do that except for a 10-day period while the waiver that would have exonerated me was being processed. And it was only after I pled that that document was produced by someone in the government from an anonymous source. It was then authenticated by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who admitted she had signed it. But I had pled guilty to the 10 days, and the government wanted a political scout. But none of that matters. None of that matters because in that intervening time, I've done everything I can in order to honor the commitment that my family and I made to stay in Washington, D.C., despite that setback in my career. And I think I've proven that I can be an effective advocate for my clients, including the American Kratom Association. Let me just clarify a couple of things that Matt said. It is absolutely true that the first version of the California bill would have been extremely restrictive about the products that would have been allowed on the marketplace, and certainly not consistent with consumer preferences of Kratom products that they safely consume. And it was only under intense pressure and negotiations that we engaged with them that they modified some of those provisions. But even today, the Global Kratom Coalition and J.W. Ross have been unwilling to accept basic amendments that would make the California bill less intrusive from a regulatory standpoint, reduce the registration fees and the burden upon the administration so that you wouldn't have very high registration fees, which would exclude a number of products from the marketplace. And they don't want to yield on some of the standards that simply do not have any scientific basis. And as Matt said, benefits their product to the exclusion of some others. We've made some progress, but we're not there. But the real tragic circumstance is what Matt referenced in Florida. We engaged in a good faith negotiation to try to find the appropriate language that we could all get behind. and with a unified voice. And while we were doing that over several weeks, and by the way, we reached an agreement and there was a conclusion to it. And then mysteriously, J.W. Ross came in and said, no, I want to add some other things, which extended the negotiations and did not allow us to present this proposed draft to the Department of Agriculture. And unfortunately, that was done just to extend the time so that they could, in these backdoor meetings, continue the negotiations with the Department of Agriculture. And today, the Department of Agriculture released the draft of the bill, which is problematic for us, is going to limit products, and it will be horrendously difficult for us to overcome some of this regulatory language that is, and you can match the California bill and you'll see some of the parallel provisions. This isn't dealing in good faith, and it does set us back. And I think Matt's point is exactly correct, that when we should be unified, when we should be trying to pass more Kratom Consumer Protection Acts, not to replace the FDA, the KCPAs were never designed to do that. They were only to put in regulatory structures that said if you want to sell a product, then you have to meet these conditions. They have to be manufactured safely. They have to have the labeling requirements on it, including, and we've improved the labeling as we've learned more as we've gone along, and age restrictions. Never intended to create a new mini bureaucracy to replace the FDA, nor was this legislation ever intended to be an FDA that would look behind every single product. It is a self-regulation model that's worked. I sat with the director of the Kratom product division of the Utah Division of Agriculture just yesterday, and they did a video which we'll share with all of you, where the director of the Department of Agriculture's program talked about the successes they've had in eliminating bad Kratom products in Utah. They've had 4 years of experience there, identifying and coaching manufacturers so that they know the proper way to label products, and they've excluded bad products. This program works. It takes one FTE, one. And yet we're talking about bureaucracies under the Florida law, which is going to have 24 employees. They only have, Utah has 3 million people, and I think Florida may have 8 to 12 million. But you don't need that kind of regulatory framework, which increases the cost and eliminates products from the marketplace because the registration fees are so high, and deprives consumers of the one thing that the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse talked about in terms of access. She said that there are programs that are available for people that are struggling with opioid addictions, but the beds aren't available. And if the beds are available, they're too expensive, or they're in locations where these individuals that are struggling with these addictions simply cannot get to them. And she touts Kratom as a harm reduction tool. Now we introduce the plain fact that you will have a cost barrier for people that are struggling with these kinds of addictions, unnecessarily imposed because of a burden on the regulatory agency in a state. So these are difficult times, and it is unexplainable that the Global Kratom Coalition would be sitting in a meeting and having discussions with us, and I'm talking over 4 weeks with multiple emails, with multiple meetings, and not once did they volunteer. Oh, by the way, we're having these private discussions with the Department of Agriculture behind your back, and none of this means anything because even the bill that we finally are close to arriving at doesn't reflect anything that's in there, or much of what's in the proposed bill from the Department of Agriculture. You will hear a lot of nonsense, and I've heard it already from the representatives of the Global Kratom Coalition, and I can tell you that there is no rational explanation for their behavior. It is much like if you were a businessman and you were negotiating with a customer, and the customer was taking the information that you were providing in terms of pricing and the formulation of your products and giving it to a competitor behind your back. This isn't the way that you conduct business, and certainly you don't develop good public policy if you can't trust one another. And so, as Matt has explained, the Global Kratom Coalition is going to go their own way. They have a right to do so. J.W. Ross has a right to form his own group. He has a right to let it be the front for his organization and for his product. He has every right to do that, but we don't have to go along with it if you can't trust people. And I'll conclude this part of the discussion with one other example. Over the last month, I've had interviews with reporters who were interviewing me about things that were provided to the reporter by J.W. Ross personally, including confidential emails in the course of these negotiations, and he cherry-picked statements that were misconstrued, distorted, and not accurate, and he got the reporter to ask me these questions on the false premise that the AK was somehow supporting dangerous products on the marketplace. The fundamental premise and the reason why a kava kratom drink can exist on the marketplace is because of existing federal law. That federal law says that if a manufacturer places a product into the marketplace, they have to have a reasonable basis for the safety under the conditions of use, which means labeling. That's why a kava kratom drink can be on the market today. And the benefit that J.W. Ross and his company enjoy as a result of that is a direct result of that legislation. And yet he wants to deprive other companies of having the same protection of that law. Now, the key here is what is it labeled for? And what is the product formulation itself upon which there is a record of safety? J.W. Ross can say, I have market experience. The other products in the marketplace that he's questioning can say the same thing. We have to test it. We have to make sure that it's properly characterized. And if it's not a kratom product, for example, 7-OH products that are certainly controversial right now, if they're not kratom, then they shouldn't be allowed to be called kratom. And that should be a part of the assessment by any regulatory body. But if kava and kratom is not kratom, then he has to suffer the same scrutiny along the way, but he doesn't want to do that. This is selfish. It's depriving this community of the opportunity to pass more kratom consumer protection acts, and it is going to make our efforts enormously more difficult, more expensive, and more difficult to get through legislative bodies, because the one thing I found in the 14 KCPAs that we have passed and been helping to pass, what we found is that simplicity appeals to legislators. They don't like overregulation. They certainly don't have the capacity. And I've had one state agency after another tell me that they don't want anything to do with kratom because they don't have the capacity to do the evaluations that are required in the California bill or in the Florida bill now in order to assess exactly what a kratom product is and what the safety and the safe formulation of those products are. This is a sad time for us, and we're going to have to fight through it, and we're committed to do that, but it's a self-inflicted wound, as Matt said. So there's two sides to the story. You're welcome to listen to them. I can tell you that we can back up everything that we've said, what I've just said, and what the characterization that Matt gave. We can back it up. We can show you exactly what's happened. And don't be duped, as these reporters initially were duped, with the false or incomplete or distorted information that's provided by these particular individuals who have the goal, obviously, of promoting a very limited set of products to the exclusion of the broad marketplace in the kratom community. I feel the pain that J.W. Ross must feel personally about his personal life being exposed in the way that it is. But I can tell you, and as Matt said, we're accountable for our actions. I was accountable 37 years ago. I never changed my name. I never distorted or tried to hide the conviction record that I had. I have disclosed it at every appropriate time when it was necessary and proper to do so. That's not the case here, because this is something that has just recently exposed, and it was done by a reporter. And by the way, as a perverse way, it was one of the reporters that J.W. Ross tried to deflect his story to me. And J.W. Ross has told me personally, a shitstorm is coming on you, meaning me. Okay. I mean, that's again, not productive. And it certainly isn't the kind of equivalence that he would choose to make it about the particular circumstances that we found ourselves in the crosshairs of the Department of Justice. There have been numerous articles written about me, by the way. We're glad to share those with you if any of you have an interest. And there may be some of you who conclude, well, you know, Matt Cattow's a bad guy too. And I hope you don't do that. But if you do, you're entitled to that particular assessment. But I can tell you, I've never hidden from it, and glad to share any information. So with that, and hopefully we can put this aside, but glad to answer any questions anybody has if you choose to offer them about some of these things. Some of the things that are happening right now we wanted to talk to you about because they're critically important. In the state of North Carolina, we had a Kratom Consumer Protection Act that was moving along nicely until it hit the Senate. And in the Senate committee that was reviewing the bill, A state senator there had a tragic circumstance in his life where he lost a child to an opioid overdose several years ago. And he feels strongly about all hemp-based products, the Delta 9s and Delta 8s, and they included Kratom in it because he's now against any product that is not conventional mainstream. And so through his efforts in the caucus in the Senate, he was able to persuade those members to replace the KCPA with a ban. We are actively working with legislative leaders in both the House and the Senate right now. I got off a call just a couple of minutes before this meeting started. We have a pathway that we think is going to reach a compromise that will allow for Kratom to be removed from that ban list, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to replace it with the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. This is going to be a delicate negotiation. It is going to be protracted in terms of time. It is likely that they're going to pass the bill with the Kratom ban out of the Senate, and then it will go to a conference committee, and that won't be convened for a couple of months. And that will give us time to work not only with educating legislators, but allow for us to have a unified voice in North Carolina with our advocacy community. And we will keep you posted and certainly have action alerts when necessary in order to communicate with specific members that really need to be persuaded. I was on a call this afternoon with an individual, a woman who is the wife to a former Navy SEAL, whose life was rehabilitated because of Kratom. Service-related injuries, all the PTSD, all of the specific physical injuries were overcome. And she talked about how they know of law enforcement officers and military officers and personnel who have benefited from Kratom, who will stand up for it. And we're, of course, going to recruit those people as best we can. This is an important time, and we're going to be working hard on it. And we are working on it right now, despite all these other diversions that are going on. In the state of New Jersey, again, another one of these tragic circumstances where a family lost a loved one. They believe it was because of Kratom, and they've convinced an individual state legislator to take up their cause. We've had negotiations with that legislator. There is a hearing scheduled, and it probably will be delayed. But even if it goes on, this member is willing to work with us, and this would only be a very first step and a very long road for the critical evaluation. We do have the Kratom Consumer Protection Act filed by another member, and we hopefully can allow that bill to prevail. But we will keep you posted in New Jersey as we go forward and as we work on all of these issues. In the state of California or state of Florida, we're going to have to obviously work now with the legislature with the draft bill that was promoted by the Department of Agriculture, which includes onerous provisions, some of which are the direct authorship of the Global Kratom Coalition. And we're going to be fighting hard against those because they do interfere with fair commerce. They do interfere with products that should be available, and they impose the most incredible fees and add more people to regulate and build a bureaucracy around Kratom that is completely unnecessary. Kratom has never been scheduled at the federal level, as we all know, and yet the Global Kratom Coalition and the Florida Agriculture Department are treating it like it's a controlled substance. And that's certainly not appropriate, and we will continue to fight against it. We will also continue to work, as we're able to do so, in California with the Assemblyman Haney and to see if he will accept some of our amendments, because the California bill now has been modified and we've made great improvements on it. It's not there yet. And we need to get a couple of other things done that I think will make it acceptable. But that's something the Jerry Ross and J.W. Ross and the Global Kratom Coalition are unwilling to do anymore. And they've simply said that you have to go to Assemblyman Haney. And when I did that, I suddenly got the door shut because the Global Kratom Coalition told him not to talk to me. And I'm hoping that we're going to knock down that barrier here shortly and have the conversation. Some great news in Rhode Island. This has been a 4-year effort with multiple meetings with the Department of Health, with various directors of the Department of Health. 2 of them have acknowledged to us over the years that Kratom does not meet the criteria for scheduling in the state of Rhode Island any more than it does on the federal level. And yet, despite those admissions, we've always had great difficulty in the Senate in order to get that bill through. This legislative session, we did it. And now it is before the governor, and the governor in the next month or so, they transmit bills in packets. There are hundreds of bills that are passed, And so whenever the Kratom Consumer Protection Act is sent over to the governor, he'll have about a week to evaluate it and decide what he's going to do. In the negotiations that we had, in order to persuade the Senate to vote with us, we sat down with the governor's staff and with all of the executive branch agencies that were opposing us, and we talked to them. We included language in the Rhode Island Kratom Consumer Protection Act that assuaged some of their concerns. I thought it was, in the end, a great outcome. Not a perfect bill, by the way. Some of the provisions had to be weakened that we like, and they didn't understand them very well. But in the end, we got a bill that will protect Rhode Islanders from products that are adulterated. It will provide an opportunity for them to go to a brick and mortar store in Rhode Island, and they can purchase something with confidence that's properly labeled and that has been registered with the state, along with the required certificate of analysis that will document that those products comply. And we'll also have provisions in there for proper labeling of the products, which will inform consumers, which is a big improvement that we've made over the years with this public policy debate. I know that the Global Kratom Coalition was very critical of the outcome of that bill, but it's because they're naive and do not understand that you have to negotiate. I can tell you that the worst KCPA in America is in West Virginia. And the only reason it's as bad as it is it could have been a ban. And we had to give a lot in order to get a KCPA rather than a ban. And I'll do that any day of the week. And I know that they criticize me for it, but that's something that we have to do in this particular legislative process. And what we will not do is compromise on our commitment to protect consumers along the way. Some of the provisions are onerous on the manufacturers, and I get that. That's true in the state of Georgia. We oppose the bill HB 181, not because of the core elements of the bill, which are the KCPA, but because they refused, because the trial attorneys got involved, to allow for a state agency to regulate it. They put it back to law enforcement, and that's just the ticket for the trial attorneys to come in and find cases that they can take to court and try to win settlements against manufacturers. And so we're going to continue to work in Georgia to try to improve that bill in the next legislative session that's coming up. We're going to be active in a lot of the states in the upcoming years. And unfortunately, this little dust up we're involved in right now probably will not help us, but we'll get through it. And we fought bigger battles in the past, and we're going to continue to work hard as we go forward. So I'll just stop there and just reassure everyone that we at the American Kratom Association have one single commitment, and that is to protect the right of consumers to have access to safe products that are manufactured properly, labeled appropriately, and that are age restricted for children. We will stay true to that commitment. You now have 13 enacted bills and one more in Rhode Island, which is a monumental achievement that will be the 14th state. But that's just the start, because as we build more momentum and we get a state like Rhode Island to make the change that they've made in a policy and overturning a ban, I think that will open the door for more reasonable discussions in each of the other states, of the 6 states that passed it. Vermont's already accepted our petition and going through rulemaking. They're struggling a little bit with the regulations that need to be imposed and the authority that the state health department might have. But we're making progress there and in Wisconsin and in Arkansas and in Indiana. And we still haven't done much in Alabama, only because the lobbyist we have there has warned us off of having the battle in the midst of some other marijuana issues that the legislature is struggling with. But we're there, we're fighting, we're always working for you, and you can have no doubt about our commitment to do that. All of us, I think, have personal failings. I have mine. And there are times when you have to change, you have to pick up by the bootstraps, and you have to take a different direction. It's happened in my life. I imagine it's happened in many of yours. But it's easy then to point your finger back, as has happened here, unfortunately, with J.W. Ross, Botanic Tonics, and the Global Kratom Coalition. We need to unify behind a common purpose and set aside these disputes. And it's only being discussed here tonight because it got to the boiling point because of a story that was done, the expose that revealed the past of J.W. Ross, which is relevant only because he didn't tell his name. He changed his name, and now he's running a product that is controversial, maybe not justified, by the way, fueled by actions by the FDA that may have been unwarranted, fueled by claims by trial attorneys that it's dangerously addictive. We need to have the evidence show one way or the other what that is. And we currently have Feel Free on our website as part of our GMP program because it documents that it meets good manufacturing practices. But what it doesn't test, and we don't require it because we follow the federal law about manufacturers having that responsibility to document on a good faith belief, a reasonable basis for the safety of their product under the conditions of use. So we accept that. But in the article and the video that Matt mentioned, there was a researcher who has worked with Kirsten Smith, with Oliver Grumman, and others in the research community who claims that the combination of those two products, kava and kratom, potentiate the kratom's alkaloids and enhances its potency. Now, if that's true and it's at a dangerous level, we need to examine that. Now, science should rule here, not the opinions of people. And so we'll continue to look at that. But we're going to stay true to the mission. We're going to do what we promised we would do. And we hope that people will unify behind this as we go forward here. So I'll stop there and we'll go through the questions that have been proposed here. And the first one is, what are the details in Virginia on the 25th? I would like to go. Great question. I should have mentioned this and I apologize. Excuse me. Under Virginia law, any individual can file a petition that would require the Board of Pharmacy to review whether or not a substance should be scheduled. In this case, a pharmacist made that appeal, supported by the Pharmacy Association, and so it got the attention of the Board of Pharmacy. We unfortunately did not know about this petition because it wasn't publicized. It's not on any of the legislative sites that we typically screen to see. And so we learned about it late in the game. And by that time, there had been about a dozen or so comments, all of which were obviously spiked by the pharmacist. And when we were able to get the Kratom community to do what they do, and it's a fabulous thing. Matt mentioned it back in 2016, it happened. And now we see it happening again. Almost 3,000 comments within just a couple of days were put there. So what's going to happen on the 25th is an interesting part of the process. The Board of Pharmacy will not accept any public comment about the petition. They also will not permit anyone to speak about any matter that's on the agenda, including specifically for the Kratom petition, because it's not subject to public comment at that point. It is only a decision that the Board of Pharmacy will make to accept or deny the petition that's been made. Now, we've submitted documents, science, we've submitted all of that. We won't be able to speak to it on the 25th, and neither, if you go, you won't be either. That's the information that we received from the staff at the Board of Pharmacy. If the Board of Pharmacy elects to open a scheduling procedure, that would take 3 to 6 months. And then we would do the same thing that we've done in other states where we've had this problem, including Ohio and Nevada, for example, where they've had boards of pharmacy, in Arizona too. And we've had to then make our case with scientists, with advocates, and we will do that. The unfortunate thing, it's a little counterintuitive that June 25th date's not going to be something the public can influence, and it'll be a decision by the Board of Pharmacy. So we hope that they make the right decision, that they've evaluated the information submitted, that they've listened to the comments, the vast majority of comments from Kratom advocates, and they'll decline specifically the petition that's been made by this pharmacist. So I'm glad to help on that in any way, and any details you need, just reach out to us and we'll provide more information. Michael asked, in Illinois villages banning Kratom with concerns over regulations, hopefully there's a strategy that KCPA can be pursued to expedite it to get the state to pass he's very concerned about Illinois. So am I. We have excellent sponsors of the KCPA who have been doing great work. We had Dr. Kirsten Smith and Jim Carroll, the former drug czar, at the White House, who testified at an informational hearing before the Consumer Protection Division just before the legislature ended their session. I'm convinced that we will have a KCPA in the next session of the Illinois legislature. Unfortunately, you have a group of anti-Kratom people, including law enforcement officers, who are misstating the position, and that's spreading around these Illinois villages. We went out to Des Plaines, for example, and they voted it down. And then a couple of weeks later, they did, when we were gone, they brought it up again and they voted in the ban. We're doing everything we can. We just presented to Tinsley Park, who also banned it, an alternative ordinance that they could have had, that they have the authority under the home rule provisions in Illinois, that they could have done it. But we're fighting against this misinformation, and that really is a real problem for us. And we're developing better resources, more specific information that we're sending on to these people. We're going to continue to fight these battles. We need the help of every advocate who lives in those particular areas. One of the criticisms that these local town councils make is, well, you're not from this city or town, right? They say that, or the village, but they're listening to the FDA, and they're listening to information provided by addiction specialists that don't live in those areas either. They just discount the people that show up to talk about the value that Kratom has had in their lives. So we need, as we're able to do so, to identify local advocates to go up and make our case. We're seeing that in Louisiana is the same problem. This is sort of the next battleground that we're going to have to open up. And we're not giving up on any of these cities, towns, or villages. We're going to go back and keep hammering them to change these provisions as new evidence comes up. An example of that is the FDA's own dose finding study, which more information was provided in the what they call the CPDD convention in Montreal this past week. And the FDA actually presented what they call a poster that gave us a lot of good information about the dose finding study we didn't have before. And all of it is very, very positive for the Kratom community, because it documents with a human study conducted by the Food and Drug Administration, and it shows the FDA has been wrong in all of the pronouncements they've made over the past 8 years, where they claim that Kratom poses an imminent threat to the American people. Now they can say that Kratom is well tolerated at all dose levels, up to 12 grams in a 5-minute period, where only 2 of the 40 human participants experienced nausea, with consumed in a 5-minute period, 24 capsules in a 5-minute period. I told that to one legislator, and she said, I'd get sick on anything in a 5-minute period, taking 24 capsules. And that's the fact of the matter is. So we're going to be able to build on this information, and we're going to make it better in terms of the way that we persuade these officials. And the key to it is getting the local help as best we can. Let me move on. Misty, I just explained the Illinois KCPA is going to have to happen in the next session, hopefully early as we go forward. You asked, so J.W. Ross essentially trying to control the monopoly. I think as a businessman, he obviously has the right to compete and find advantages in the marketplace, but he ought to do so with the quality of his product, with his marketing, or with some kind of enhanced, innovative product, the way that he can sell to people. He shouldn't do it through a statute. The idea that you use a state statute in order to limit your competitors just seems anti-competitive to me, and certainly contrary to our free enterprise system. Bud Smith asked, what's going on in New York? Bud, you've been a champion in New York. You've done yeoman service. You know that New York's a really unique place in that they don't hold public hearings on bills. They don't accept testimony. And it's the same thing that we've experienced in Rhode Island, where we have to keep at it for a couple of years. And so I think that we've, with Bud's help, where he's gone up to the state capitol numerous times, he is a champion of Kratom, and we honor him. I think that this is where we are in New York, where we're going to have to take that final step, and it'll be the year of Kratom in 2025 in New York. Just as Speaker Shikarchi told me in Rhode Island that 2024 is the year of Kratom, and guess what it is. So we're looking forward to 2025 as we go forward in New York in all of this. Melody says in Tinley, Susan Eppert from Michigan testified about her son's death. They were fine with that. That's a great point. You know, when there's an emotional, appealing story that everybody's going to be empathetic. They seem to be more tolerant than someone standing up and saying, Kratom saved my life. And that's unfortunate. It's human instinct, I guess, and you want to be sympathize with someone who's obviously had a death. Let me say that that as it relates to the Kratom Danger Awareness Group, and I said this on the last call that we had, and there was a little bit of a blowback. There are members of the Kratom Danger Awareness Group that have called me and said they really don't think Kratom should be banned. They just want to see it regulated. but the stream of information that is provided by Wendy and Susan in that group is all anti-kratom and all anti-regulation, and they want bans. That's clearly what they're doing, and that's truly unfortunate because while I have great sympathy and empathy for the losses in their individual families, they're not willing to come to the table and have a discussion or show any of the information about those deaths for which there can be a reasonable evaluation to determine if there was another substance or if there was another underlying medical condition. We ought to be seeking the truth rather than trying to demonize something. I get it that the trial attorneys are fomenting this. They want to find new clients. They want to help support groups like Kratom Danger Awareness. That's their right, but it ought to be founded on the truth. It ought to be founded on good science. And every time something happens like the dose finding study, it's demonized by the Kratom Danger Awareness, saying, oh, that isn't what it says at all. Well, guess what it is? And you can't deny it. And you look at the science, and even the FDA scientists are saying, this is what the results prove to us. And that paved the way for a human abuse potential study that will take about 3 years, and we'll get some good information from that. We're willing to change and have on some of our requirements for labeling in order to guard against products that are dangerous. We're willing to do that as science evolves and informs us along the way. And I would hope that sometime this KDA group will come around, at least the members, but they were on a search to find out who the guy was or the woman was that called me. They're actually a couple who expressed this sentiment. I was over in Maryland when the KCPA bill was being evaluated on the Senate side, and I spoke to the father of the son who passed away, and he had had multiple substances he was struggling with, including kratom. And of course, the mother and he had testified because they wanted to see the bill that was being passed by the Maryland legislature, specifically the TNF team, to ban it. But the father told me in the hallway, he said, look, kratom helped my son, and I don't want to see it banned. And so this is fine with me, what you're trying to do here. And we walked away shaking hands as people that understood one another. And he was willing to share the fact that his son had other substances with him. Unfortunately, that's not what you're seeing with some of the zealots. And I have said it before, and I will tell you that the leadership of the Kratom Danger Awareness Group are clearly extremists. They're not willing to have a rational discussion. They just want to shoot from the sidelines, criticize, and personally demonize me and the AKA when we're really not the bad people that they say we are. Now, I think that's a fairly subjective thing, but I would think I would make that defense. So, but they're obviously someone that we have to pay attention to and try to respond to as we go forward in all of this. I see Representative Kennedy's on in the chat room. I don't know if we could elevate Representative Kennedy to be a panelist. Can we do that on the support staff? Because this is a guy who has been, without question, persistent, doggedly trying to get this legislation through because he cares about this issue, because he cares about the people of Rhode Island, and he cares about the mistake that was made along the way. So, Mark, can we elevate Representative Kennedy to be a panelist here? Hopefully they can do that. We'll work on it. And I'm just scanning through any of these other comments that were made. Dion says she's here. I got to recognize Dion too. All of you, if you've been involved in this community, you know Dion Evans. And she's a magnificent advocate for kratom, and she does so when it's very, very difficult because of health issues that she has undertaken. And she will go the extra mile and then go another mile because she's passionate about this. She believes in it. We had the opportunity at the American Kratom Association to recognize her as one of our legacy advocates, receiving the honor as that she deserves to be recognized as one of the great advocates of the kratom community. And I'm grateful for her, and I'm glad that she's with us here today. We appreciate her very much. And there are others in the kratom community that are obviously here too that we deeply appreciate along the way. So, Mark, we've been able to elevate Brian to be a panelist. I hope he's listening to me. Maybe we can. But just know that Brian Patrick Kennedy, who is the president of the National Conference of State Legislators, so he's a leader in the legislative community, who stuck his neck out early on against the Department of Health in Rhode Island, and he has doggedly pursued correcting the mistake that was made by the Department of Health in Rhode Island. And here we are on the precipice of success and victory along the way. And based on at least the negotiations that involve the governor's office and the executive branch agencies, they really shouldn't be a cause or a reason for there to be a veto of this bill, because it does correct a mistake. It does protect Rhode Island consumers, and it provides a pathway for Rhode Islanders to not have to take more risky decisions about how they acquire their Kratom products. And so I think that's a magnificent thing that has gone away. So I think with that we can end, unless there's any additional questions anyone wants to pop up before we say goodbye. Doesn't look like it. So we'll say thank you to everyone. We appreciate, as I've always said, the advocacy and the sacrifices and the commitments that you make in order to make a reality the objective that we want to keep Kratom legal. And we're going to continue to fight for that. And despite all of these targets that we have painted on our backs, that we are going to continue to fight for this. So I thank you and appreciate it. Matt, do you have any final comments that you want to make before we close?
No, Mac, I think you've covered it very, very well. But more importantly than anything else, I just want to go back to actually a quote from the Bible, which probably has more relevance now than ever. A house divided against itself cannot stand. The fact is, we've got to stick together. And right now, the time is more crucial than ever, because the challenges, while they've morphed, from one thing to another over the last several years, they never seem to go away. And we need everybody at the table. We need to keep talking. And, if you have any questions about any of this stuff that we've talked about today, or if you'd like to receive those videos that we talked about, just reach out to us, and we're happy to provide anything we can to help you do your job. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everyone.